Several law enforcement agencies are raiding the home of hip-hop mogul P. Diddy.
A new civil lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs accuses him of sex trafficking.
You know him as Diddy, formerly Puff Daddy, big-time rapper, big-time superstar, and now the feds at his houses in both locations.
It's like a tapestry of criminal activity.
We are hearing from Homeland Security.
I wanted to clear that the career of Sean P. Diddy Combs is over.
Imagine thinking you're about to walk free, only to have the judge shut it all down. Diddy thought he had it in the bag, but when the judge rejected his bail request, he lost it. Sean Diddy Combs will remain in prison as he waits for his trial. A federal judge rejected his bail bid of $50 million.
In the past couple hours in the Sean Diddy Combs case,
defense attorneys are requesting he be released on bail and placed on home confinement. Eyewitness News reporter Annabelle Munoz is here with more on a ruling expected in a matter of days that could lead to his release.
It certainly could, Philip and Ellen, and this is Combs' third request for bail. Two judges have shut down previous efforts, saying there's enough evidence he's a danger to the community to obstruct justice and intimidate witnesses. Today, his attorneys made another case for home confinement.
Despite multiple attempts by his defense team to secure his release from the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, the judge overseeing his sex trafficking case ruled he'll stay behind bars. We've got all the latest updates for you. Sean Diddy Combs won't be spending Thanksgiving with his family this year. Judge Arun Subramanian has denied bail once again to the music mogul, who has been behind bars at the Metropolitan Detention Center since his September arrest on federal sex crime charges. Judge Arun Subramanian's decision means Diddy will stay in jail for the foreseeable future. The prosecution and defense argued for and against Diddy's bail at a hearing last week. Now we've got the judge's official ruling, thank you. The order was issued just before Thanksgiving, late on Wednesday, and it states, the court has evaluated each of the factors it must consider under the relevant law. 1. Nature and circumstances of the offense charged. 2. Weight of the evidence against the person. 3. History and characteristics of the person. The fourth factor pertains to the nature and seriousness of the potential danger the person's release could pose. The ruling also mentions that Judge Subramanian has reviewed all the information submitted by both the defense and the government throughout all three bail hearings. Recall that both a magistrate judge and a district court judge had previously denied Diddy bail. Judge Subramanian wrote in his decision that the court believes the government has clearly and convincingly shown that no condition or set of conditions will reasonably ensure the safety of the community. This is the standard that was needed. He goes on to outline the reasons for this conclusion, which could keep Diddy behind bars for a while longer. Judge Subramanian starts by outlining the seriousness of the charges against Sean Diddy Combs. In his ruling, Judge Subramanian notes that the indictment charges Combs with serious and violent crimes. As a reminder, Combs faces multiple charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The judge then highlights the details in the indictment, which describe a pattern of abuse and coercion. According to Subramanian, the charges allege that for decades, Combs used threats and manipulation to control women and others around him to satisfy his sexual desires, protect his public image, and cover up his actions. The indictment claims that Combs relied on his vast business empire, using its resources and influence to create a criminal enterprise involved in various illegal activities. The ruling goes on to cite specific evidence presented by the government. One key piece is a 2016 videotape showing Combs allegedly beating his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura. CNN released this video in a hotel hallway several months ago, and it has become a significant piece of evidence in the case.
From at least 2008 through the present, Combs has led a criminal enterprise that existed to facilitate his abuse and exploitation of women, to protect his reputation, and to conceal his conduct. As part of that criminal enterprise, Sean Combs, along with other members and associates, committed crimes including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Combs' efforts to control women included repeated physical abuse. Combs assaulted women by, among other things, punching, striking, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. And he similarly assaulted assaulted witnesses of his abuse. These assaults often resulted in injuries which could take days or weeks to heal. And to commit these crimes, Combs relied on his power as the leader of a multifaceted business empire. Employees of Combs' businesses, including high-ranking supervisors, security, personal assistants, and household staff, acted as intermediaries to, among other things, arrange travel and hotel rooms, stock the hotel rooms, contact or locate women or other individuals who he targeted for abuse, and to cover up and conceal the abuse. This criminal concealment included efforts to prevent law enforcement from hearing about it.
It's important to note that Ventura was the one who filed a lawsuit against Combs in November 2023. Setting off a chain of events that led to the current criminal charges and multiple lawsuits against him. Judge Subramanian doesn't just rely on the 2016 video to highlight Combs' history of violence. He also points to text messages between Combs and what he identifies as Victim 1, who is believed to be Cassandra Ventura. In these texts, Ventura describes the aftermath of the hotel incident, saying, "I have a black eye and a fat lip. You are sick for thinking it's okay to do what you've done. I'm still recovering from the severe injuries I sustained." The judge also cites evidence that suggests a serious risk of witness tampering. One key example is Combs' communications with Witness 1, who was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury in June 2024 and did so in July. Under legal representation, Combs explained some of these communications, but there are several instances they couldn't account for. Notably, Combs persistently reached out to this witness after their grand jury testimony, sending texts and making calls that he failed to adequately explain. Even more troubling is the discovery of deleted messages between Combs and this witness. The judge points out that while contacting a witness before their grand jury testimony could raise concerns, attempting to reach out after the fact is a much more serious issue, especially when it involves deleting messages. Judge Subramanian also points to evidence suggesting that Combs violated Bureau of Prisons regulations during his pre-trial detention in an effort to obscure his communications with third parties. As discussed previously, Combs was allegedly using other inmates' PAC numbers to make phone calls, a private messaging service to reach out to people, and even engaging in three-way phone calls. The concern was that he wasn't just breaking the rules. He was possibly trying to contact potential witnesses in the case or even influence potential jurors through social media. Notably, Judge Subramanian asserts the court makes no determination that the content of communications through these channels was improper. This is an intriguing distinction because during the hearing, the judge discussed whether Combs' social media activity or posts through others were inappropriate. It would constitute an issue if the judge clarified that he's not focusing on the content of the messages themselves. But the fact that Combs was deliberately ignoring the rules is what's problematic, he writes. However, his willingness to skirt BOP rules in a way that would make it more difficult for his communications to be monitored is strong evidence that the court cannot be reasonably assured as to the sufficiency of any conditions of release. This is particularly concerning because it happened during Combs' bail application, a time when he was aware of the government's serious concerns about witness tampering and obstruction. The fact that Combs was trying to hide his communications while under investigation for obstruction and with the government actively looking into his behavior is not a favorable look. Another reason the court seemed hesitant about releasing Sean Combs was the issue of trust in his proposed bail conditions. During the hearing, Combs' attorneys argued that he could be trusted to comply with release terms, pointing out that he had an apartment in New York and would have private security. Judge Subramanian, however, expressed doubts about relying on Combs or his employees to ensure the fulfillment of those conditions. The judge wrote, "The court doubts the sufficiency of any conditions that place trust in Combs and individuals in his employ, like a private security detail, to follow those conditions." This strongly suggests that the prosecution's argument about the potential influence or manipulation of his private security team swayed the judge. There was an interesting exchange about case discrepancies at the start of the hearing. Judge Subramanian questioned Combs' attorneys about photographs taken from his jail cell. The defense argued that this was a violation of attorney-client privilege, claiming that some of the photographed materials were protected by confidentiality. We'll dive into this point in more detail shortly, but it's clear that the judge took these concerns seriously when considering Combs' release. The defense contended that the markings on several legal pads in Sean Combs' cell indicated they held privileged information. However, Judge Subramanian pointed out a discrepancy. He wrote, "The court further notes that it had held an emergency hearing to address the government's use of notes on legal pads recovered from Combs' bunk. During the hearing, the defense counsel informed the court that all these legal pads had clear legal markings. After the hearing, the court questioned why, given the defense counsel's representation, the notes in question were on clearly marked legal pads, while photographs taken during the sweep showed no such labels." The judge continued, "Defense counsel acknowledged that not every legal pad had the word legal written on it on the day of the search, and they were uncertain if the pad they presented to the court had legal on it during the sweep." The judge then remarked, "The circumstances of this incident and the misrepresentation made at the hearing where Combs was present bear on whether the court can be reasonably assured that any conditions it imposes will be followed, or whether through inadvertence or active subversion, they will be broken. There was a threat to the community's safety. The judge appears to be implying a lack of trust in the defense." Finally, Judge Subramanian distinguished the Combs case from that of Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abadi and Fit, who was arrested on similar sex trafficking charges in New York. Despite the fact that both cases involve sex trafficking, Judge Subramanian pointed out the differences in each defendant's level of threat. He cited the comparison in United States versus Jeff. While the government raised danger, its principal concern with respect to defendant Mike Jeff was flight. Defendant Mike Jeff had no criminal history. The alleged criminal conduct did not involve the type of violence or RICO allegations that were made here nearly a decade ago, and Jeff was 80 years old. This distinction highlighted the unique and more serious nature of the Combs case. In the end, Judge Subramanian denied Sean Combs bail, and it looks like the only remaining option for him is to appeal the decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The Combs team had initially filed an appeal, but they decided to pause it and return to Judge Subramanian for further consideration. With the ruling now against them, the appeal process is back on the table. We previously did a full breakdown of last week's hearing where both sides presented their arguments, so let's revisit that discussion. It's shaping up to be a fascinating week in the ongoing legal saga of Sean Diddy Combs. After the recent bail hearing before Judge Aaron Subramanian, the likelihood of his release in time for Thanksgiving has significantly increased. Let me explain why. The Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn has been holding Sean Combs since his arrest in September. He's facing serious charges. They specifically accuse him of using force, threats, and coercion to manipulate women into engaging in sexual acts, some of which involved male sex workers, known as the freak-offs he allegedly orchestrated. Combs faces accusations of operating a criminal enterprise that engages in various illegal activities, such as kidnapping, arson, and violence. So far, 2 judges, a district court judge and a magistrate judge, have both denied Combs bail, agreeing with the prosecution's stance that he poses a danger to society. They highlighted the severity of the charges, his wealth and resources as potential flight risks, and his attempts at witness tampering. The defense presented a comprehensive bail package that included a $50 million bond, home confinement, restricted phone and internet use, round-the-clock private security, and strict visitation limits. The judges ruled that these conditions were insufficient to mitigate the risks. The bail package is of a scale that is frankly unprecedented in these types of cases. Prosecutors prepared with fresh arguments and evidence for the Friday hearing before Judge Aaron Subramanian, the latest assigned judge in the case. This was particularly important since Judge Subramanian had not yet made a ruling on the bail issue. Prosecutors asserted that Sean Combs had breached Bureau of Prisons regulations during his detention at the MDC, potentially playing a crucial role in determining his bail eligibility. The argument was simple. If Combs can't follow the rules while incarcerated, why should the court believe he would adhere to conditions on the outside? On top of that, prosecutors alleged that Combs had been involved in unauthorized communications from jail. This included using other inmates' phone access codes to make calls, participating in 3-way phone calls on a monitored phone, and using a third-party text messaging service. They argued that he was using these methods to reach out to witnesses and potentially influence the jury pool in his case. Prosecutors cited a specific example of a social media campaign that coincided with Combs's birthday. His family had released a video of them celebrating and wishing him a happy birthday while he was on the phone from behind bars. Prosecutors believe the intent behind this video was to sway potential jurors, and they claim to have evidence backing up this theory. During the Friday hearing, both the prosecution and defense raised several issues related to the bail decision. However, a thorough understanding of the courtroom proceedings is essential. However, there were no cameras in the courtroom, and electronic devices were limited, so we're using reports from attendees. One of the first matters addressed at the hearing wasn't directly about bail, but rather an issue from a few days earlier. The defense accused the prosecution of improperly photographing materials potentially protected by attorney-client and work product privilege. This happened after a sweep for contraband at the MDC, where Combs is being held. The defense asserts that the sweep targeted Combs, while the prosecutors refute this claim, asserting their lack of involvement in the search. However, an investigator from the Bureau of Prisons apparently took photos of notepads found in the Combs detention unit. Following a hearing on this matter, Judge Subramanian ruled that the prosecution must destroy 19 copies of photographs containing those pages. He ruled that bail hearing evidence from those photos was inadmissible. The prosecution hoped to use a key piece of evidence, an alleged attempt by Combs to contact a witness they believed was visible in one of these photos. Judge Subramanian said he would need to decide at a later date whether a privilege violation had occurred. If a violation was found, the next steps are unknown. The Combs defense team has requested that the indictment be dismissed and that the prosecution's team from the Southern District of New York be recused from the case. The court's decision is still pending. Judge Subramanian raised an issue with the defense's argument. The defense asserted that the legal pads discovered in Sean Combs' detention unit bore the word legal prominently, signifying their privileged nature and exclusivity to prosecutors. However, Judge Subramanian wasn't convinced. He pointed out that the defense had presented an intact legal pad with the word legal written on it. But when the photos of the pads taken during the sweep at the MDC were examined, there was no such writing. The judge asked, why is the word legal only on the pad after the fact? This raised questions about the credibility of the defense's argument and didn't look favorable for Sean Combs or his legal team. Mark Agnifilo, one of Combs' attorneys, admitted during the hearing that he wasn't sure when he had written the word legal on the legal pads. He also acknowledged that not all the pads discovered during the sweep bore the word legal. In response, Judge Subramanian reportedly asked, "Did the pad you handed me say legal on it on November 1st? Agnifilo responded, "I'm not sure," in reference to the date of the sweep. This exchange prompted Judge Subramanian to caution the defense. Warning, moving forward, make sure all of your representations to the court are true. It wasn't the most promising start for the defense. From there, the focus shifted to the bail arguments. Prosecutors firmly maintained that they couldn't rely on Sean Combs to comply with the terms of his pre-trial release. They pointed to the allegations of misconduct while he was at the MDC, which they believed demonstrated a pattern of disregard for authority. Judge Subramanian's question about whether Combs could be trusted with 24/7 private security while under home confinement caught the attention of Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic. When asked whether she would trust the Combs security team, Slavic responded by revealing that one member of the team was allegedly a co-conspirator in Combs' criminal activities. She asserted that they had confiscated this person's phone and that another member of the security team, a defense investigator, had been in communication with witnesses. In other words, the prosecution argued this so-called security team was essentially working for Combs. Later in the hearing, Mark Agnifilo, Combs' attorney, countered by proposing the use of an independent security team. He emphasized that Combs would be living under far more restrictive conditions at home than he currently experiences at the MDC. Judge Subramanian then turned to Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic and asked, "You cite his wealth as an issue for pre-trial release, so can't he use it?" This question highlighted a key point of contention. The prosecution argued that Combs' wealth, power, and resources made him a flight risk and allowed him to flout the rules. leading them to believe he shouldn't receive bail. On the other hand, the defense argued that the only way to address these concerns was to create an expensive and highly restrictive bail package, which they hoped would alleviate those fears. Slavic, however, responded by saying that their push for continued detention wasn't based on Combs' wealth, but on his dangerousness, flight risk, and obstruction of justice. This prompted Judge Subramanian to ask her to clarify the obstruction argument further. Slavic pointed to previous allegations, but the judge pressed her, asking, "Is running a PR campaign from behind bars considered obstruction?" He was referring to the birthday message campaign Combs allegedly orchestrated. Prosecutor Slavic contended that the MDC had recorded Combs saying something along the lines of, "I need only one," in a phone call. This, she claimed, suggested that Combs was trying to influence the jury, potentially impacting the integrity of the case. Slavic argued that this was part of his broader effort to obstruct the proceedings. The discussion then shifted to the allegations that Combs had attempted to contact people inappropriately. Combs' other attorney, Alexandra Shapiro, made a clear distinction between Combs' actions and other cases where defendants had instructed people to lie. She also argued that Combs had a First Amendment right to defend himself publicly, especially in the face of negative media coverage. Judge Subramanian, however, questioned why Combs couldn't do this through his lawyers instead of reaching out through third parties. While they were happy to do so, Shapiro said it wasn't their job to manage Combs' personal communications. He was referring to the birthday message campaign Combs allegedly orchestrated. Prosecutor Slavic contended that the MDC had recorded Combs saying something along the lines of, "I need only one," in a phone call. This, she claimed, suggested that Combs was trying to influence the jury, potentially impacting the integrity of the case. Slavic argued that this was part of his broader effort to obstruct the proceedings. The discussion then shifted to the allegations that Combs had attempted to contact people inappropriately. Combs' other attorney, Alexandra Shapiro, made a clear distinction between Combs' actions and other cases where defendants had instructed people to lie. She also argued that Combs had a First Amendment right to defend himself publicly, especially in the face of negative media coverage. Judge Subramanian, however, questioned why Combs couldn't do this through his lawyers instead of reaching out through third parties. While they were happy to do so, Shapiro said it wasn't their job to manage Combs' personal communications. She also denied that Combs had obstructed justice by contacting victims or witnesses, assuring the judge that Combs would follow his lawyer's advice and avoid doing anything they told him not to do. The hearing reached what was arguably its most pivotal moment when Judge Subramanian asked about the specifics of where Sean Combs would serve his home confinement. Mark Agnifilo, Combs' attorney, responded that it would take place in Miami with a dock on the property but no boat. The judge expressed dissatisfaction with this response, stating that's not going to work. Where in New York could he stay? Agnifilo then suggested an apartment on the Upper East Side in New York with 3 bedrooms and explained that there would be 2 security guards, one on the ground floor. Combs would not have access to phones or the internet except for calls with his legal team, and he could not contact any potential witnesses in the case. This could be a sign that Judge Subramanian was considering granting Combs home confinement as part of a potential pre-trial release. However, Judge Subramanian also heard from pre-trial services, the office responsible for ensuring that federal defendants appear in court and don't pose a threat to the community while out on bail. The pre-trial services representative sided with the prosecution, arguing that the proposed bail conditions were insufficient. That said, the representative acknowledged that they weren't aware of any cases where private security guards had been used as part of bail conditions, marking this as a unique situation. After hearing all sides, the judge announced that he would decide on the bail situation promptly, likely the following week. He requested that both the prosecution and the defense submit letters to the court by Monday at noon to address a key issue. What, if anything, Combs could say about his own case at this stage? The defense promptly submitted those letters. The defense, in their letter, pointed to the recent case of United States versus Donald Trump, argued that Combs, like Trump, was a criminal defendant, presumed innocent, and therefore had a greater constitutional right to speak out about the prosecution and the criminal trial process. They contended that, akin to Trump's situation, Combs should have greater freedom to critique the legal proceedings and the attempts to deprive him of his liberty. The defense emphasized in their argument that the First Amendment protected Sean Combs' right to free speech. In particular, they emphasized the protection of his right to free speech. Alexandra Shapiro, one of Combs' attorneys, pointed to several court cases in her letter to back up her position. However, she noted that none of these cases were even remotely similar to the issues at hand. The defense argued that Combs' public statements didn't fall into categories that would harm witness testimony or compromise the integrity of the case. They made it clear that Combs wasn't attempting to undermine the prosecution's case, discredit witnesses, or influence the media with evidence. There were no efforts to release court-ordered discovery or obstruct the legal process in the way that courts typically define obstruction. Shapiro further emphasized that the government was advocating for a standard that would allow the press, civil plaintiffs, and the government itself to attack Combs' reputation, but would not allow Combs to defend himself or influence public opinion in return. She argued that this wasn't the law. The defense firmly stated, referencing the numerous lawsuits Combs was facing at the time, that the prosecution's examples were not valid reasons to keep Combs in jail and should not serve as justification to deny him bail. On the other hand, the prosecution wasted no time making their stance clear in their letter. They argued that Combs' history of obstructive behavior was an ongoing issue, deeply linked to his long pattern of violent conduct. They said that when considering both his obstruction and violent behavior, the risks of allowing him bail became obvious. The prosecution maintained that the bail package presented by the Combs defense team failed to sufficiently ensure the safety of the community or mitigate the risk of him fleeing. They concluded by asserting that the defendant's persistent efforts to obstruct the case warrant an outright denial of his renewed bail application. Unlike the previous two judges, Judge Subramanian's decision to not immediately deny Sean Combs' bail request signals that Combs could potentially receive bail. The judge has even entertained the idea of what home confinement might look like for him, which means that for now, it's still on the table. However, it's crucial to remember that the Metropolitan Detention Center will receive Combs immediately upon his release if he violates any of the bail conditions. And unless something extraordinary happens, it's unlikely he'd get another opportunity to seek bail again. Therefore, Combs must behave well upon his release to prevent any additional issues. That being said, the government still has the option to file obstruction charges against Combs, potentially stemming from his actions in the MDC. They could even bring additional charges through a superseding indictment based on what they claim he did while in custody. Remember, the government is currently submitting evidence to a grand jury in New York, which could lead to further legal action. The government could use this evidence, even in the absence of new charges, to bolster their racketeering case against him if Combs is released and subsequently violates his bail conditions. Additional charges could be filed at that time. If Judge Subramanian ultimately denies Combs' bail request, Combs would have one final chance to appeal the decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. His legal team had previously submitted a brief to support the bail request with his higher court, but they had asked the court to pause a decision until after they had petitioned Judge Subramanian. Ultimately, after a lengthy legal battle, the court officially denied Sean Combs bail for the third time. That's all the latest updates we have for now. Thanks for joining us, and as always, please subscribe to our channel.